Hi, I'm Jill from Intuitive Metals, and today I'm here with PMC Supplies to show you some basics of soldering. So today we're going to be making a pendant with this beautiful black stone I have. And I have a sample here from a different stone to show you what we have in store. So you'll see here that I have a couple different forms of sterling silver. I have a thin strip of bezel wire that's going to hold our stone. I have some different gauge wire ranging from 20 to 16 to see what best suits our piece. And I have a piece of sterling sheet. This is maybe 18 gauge. This is a little bit thick, but I want a thick backplate on my piece, so that's why I chose this gauge. I have a variety of tools in front of me today that I like to use when I'm soldering, from the torch to the flux, the pickle, and of course the solder. So the main three grades of solder we use are easy, medium, and hard. And me personally, I like to use mostly hard and medium. I try to keep easy for repairs or emergencies. It's also important to make sure that your solder is labeled easy, medium, and hard, or that you have a way to differentiate it, because once your solders get mixed up, it's really hard to tell which one's which. Let's talk a little bit about the torch setup we have here. So this is a Smith mini torch. This is one of my favorite torches to use. It's an oxyacetylene torch. I have my tanks down here. They're turned on and ready to go. The Smith mini torch comes with a few different tips. I'm mostly using the size 4 tip. And you want to make sure that the tip is just really tightly on there. If it's not, you're going to have some gas that leaks out. So to turn on your torch, you're first going to turn on the acetylene. You don't need much, just a little. And we'll tap it against our automatic torch lighter. And there we go. For my purposes, I want, a pretty hot flame, but I don't want it huge. So I'll turn up the acetylene just a little and then slowly open the oxygen till we get a flame that looks like this. The more I turn on the oxygen, the smaller the cone is going to get, and the hotter my flame's going to be. To turn off the torch, I'll first close the oxygen and then the acetylene. Today we're using handy flux, which is a paste-like flux. There are also liquid flux or powder flux that you yourself could mix with water. They're meant to provide a clean environment for the solder to flow. Sometimes I like to add water to my handy flux to make it the consistency that I like. Over here I have my pickle pot and my pickle. Pickle is essentially an acid bath that cleans dirty metal. There are many types of pickle out on the market, but today I'm going to be trying a citric acid pickle because it's environmentally friendly. So this is the surface that I'm going to be soldering on. I have a fire brick just to prop up my soldering board. Another essential, the soldering pick to pick up and move around the solder. And I like to have a pair of tweezers around so that I can make intricate little movements. Once the torch gets involved, the metal is hot, so I don't want to touch it with my fingers at all. Also, I have a cross-locking pair of tweezers on my third hand. And this is really helpful whenever I need something to be held in place. Any assistance in soldering, this does a great job at helping me out. And in addition to all of the soldering tools, we also have a variety of metalsmithing tools that we're going to use. All the basics. So we have a jeweler's saw frame and saw blades. I like to use 4-0. We have some files here, a pair of pliers and some wire cutters, and some sandpaper. So let's make our pickle. I've already put water in our pickle pot and have had the pot plugged in so the water is nice and warm. And I've pre-measured our pickle. give it a nice stir. Remember to only use copper tongs in your pickle because if you put anything that's steel in, it will contaminate it. Let's get started. So I'm at the bench and I'm going to start forming my bezel wire to fit my stone. So I'm trying to get a basic shape here, and I can go back in and add in the detail I need or pull back any curves. So I'm flipping the piece over to make sure that I get an even bend on both sides so that the wire is kept relatively straight. So this step takes a lot of patience, so you should be aware of that you have to go back and forth quite a bit. It's rarely perfect the first time around. You make some great progress and then you make one adjustment and you're back to where you started. So be patient, it'll work out in the end. So you'll notice when I'm making the bends that I'm using the pliers, but I'm also using my hands to move the metal. For some of these movements, I'm just using the pliers, but for a lot of them, I'm holding the metal with the plier and shaping it around the plier with my hand. I've also considered where I want my solder seam to be. So see how I've ended my bezel wire at the tip of the stone? That's where our solder seam is going to be. That's where the two pieces are going to come together. So I've got my bezel wire close to where I want it to be, but I still have some work to do. So I'm going to cut off all of this excess, so I don't need it anymore. So when I hold my stone with the bezel wire up to the light, I can see the places it's touching and the places it's not, because ideally I want every place to be touching. So I've marked those points, and that gives me a good guide to where I need to go back in and bend a little bit more. Okay, getting there. All right, so we're pretty much where we want to be. So I have some extra bezel wire that's sticking up here, and I'm going to cut some of it off, but I'm still going to leave a little bit of extra because I'm going to refine it with my file. This is a really crucial thing because we've spent a lot of time getting this bezel to be the shape of our stone. And if we make it small now, a lot of our hard work is going to go out the window. So let's just be really mindful and slow about the steps we're taking now. Now, let's go back to the stone and see what other adjustments I need to make. So we are ready to go. I'm going to line this up perfectly so it doesn't budge once it's on our soldering board. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so we're ready to solder this piece. I'm going to hold it with my third hand and my cross-locking tweezer. Cutting some pieces of hard solder. All right, so let's apply our flux. The flux is really important because it's going to keep our metal clean. While we're heating it, it doesn't get oxidized. and it creates a great environment for the solder to flow in our seam. So our flux is set, and now we're ready to heat our piece. Let's turn on the mini torch, first the acetylene. Then the oxygen. Okay, let's come and let's start evenly heating the piece. You'll see the flux has started to bubble up. And we're ready to start applying our solder. So I'm going to put my flame on the solder, let it ball up, and I'm going to put my pick behind it so it doesn't roll down the board. I'm actually going to grab this piece too, because I would rather apply more than less right now. So let's come back to our piece with our flame. And we are heating the entire thing, but we're focusing the flame on where we're wanting to solder. Okay, so I'm going to slowly start to bring the solder down. And I'm going to keep my pick really close by in case it moves. Soldering, so heating that area, and you'll see the solder is flowing. Okay, that's looking great. Shut my torch off. And now this piece is ready for the pickle. We'll let that piece sit in the pickle for a couple minutes until it's clean. Yeah, we look good. So I'm putting it in a solution of baking soda and water to neutralize it. Great. So we soldered really beautifully, and now we're going to refine a bit so that you're not going to see any seam or any solder clump. We're looking really good, but I do see an adjustment I want to make, and this is a great time to make all of those last minute adjustments to make the bezel fit exactly how you want it to. The next step is to flat sand the bottom of our bezel. We want to make sure we're doing this on a flat surface. And I'm going to flip it around, do the same thing on that side, change it around. Now, a great way to know if we've flat sanded enough is to mark the area and to sand again. We'll see if there's any high parts or low parts, or we'll really just see if there's any low parts. Okay. Put our setting on our stone, and we're going to see how much the metal is sticking up. There are some areas that I want to file down so that the bezel doesn't cover up too much of the stone in that area. I want it to be even all the way around. So it sits pretty high here, and it sits a little bit high here. So I'm going to file down on those areas, so just very subtle file here, and then more removing of material here. So we have filed the top of our piece, and now we're going to sand it. Now when I'm sanding this side, it's less important for me to be flat sanding or sanding it perfectly flat. So I'm going to kind of rock it because that's how my stone is. I'm gonna give it one overall sanding. And then I'm gonna kind of rock the point and rock the bottom. This is 240 grit, so I'm going to bring in 320. Same motion here. A little bit of pressure towards the bottom. I like to get my bezel as ready as can be before we do anything else, so that I know that it's complete and ready to go. Okay, let's check it out. It looks like the bezel is sitting up fairly evenly along the entire surface or the curve of the stone. All right, so let's get prepared to cut out our back plate. So we're going to take our stone with our bezel and place it on our sheet. And remember, on our sample, we have a border around our bezel, so I want to recreate that here. So I'm going to give kind of a rough, it doesn't have to be perfect at this point. This is going to be scrap now, I'm sure I can use that for something. I've got my jeweler's saw frame with a 3/0 blade and going to apply some lubrication. This is going to help me cut more smoothly without some of the chatter of the metal. I'm going to file just the edges of this to take off any sharp parts while I'm working with it. We will further refine it later on. We want both sides to be flat. The reason I'm doing this is because there were some burrs from me cutting it. I need to make sure that this is perfectly flat so that our bezel will sit comfortably, nice and flat on our back plate. Now that we're all flat sanded, I want to make sure that the bottom of our bezel and the top of our back plate are meeting flush. That looks perfect. All right, so we have our pieces ready to go, and the first thing we need to do now is flux everything. So I'm actually just going to move this piece to the side while I flux this piece really well. My piece is going to move around a bit once I apply the flame, so I don't need to place it perfectly just yet. But let's get a really nice even coat of flux over this entire piece. This is a big piece of metal we're working with, so it's going to take a while to heat it. but that's okay. We're gonna do slow. See, the flux is starting to burn off. So I'm heating this entire thing, but I'm really trying to focus the heat on the big back plate because it's a lot thicker and a lot bigger than our bezel. So I know when the flux starts to get liquidy looking, then it's getting to be a good temperature for soldering. So now is a good time for me to notice, is this placed where I want it to be? And if it's not, I could nudge it. So that looks pretty good. It's not completely centered on the piece, but it looks like I have enough space here for what I'm trying to create. Okay, so we're ready to start placing down some solder. So I'm gonna grab some pieces and place them right next to my bezel. So solder might have a tendency to move, especially if your flux is still in a stage where it's flowing. So I really want to load this up with solder. I can always file it off, but I just don't want to have any empty spaces. I want these two pieces of metal to be merged together. Now it's going to really help that we did all the preparations to make the two pieces touch perfectly, and we're creating a great environment for a perfect solder seam. So what I like to do is flow some solder and then pick up my piece so I can heat the bottom. Okay, so because this backplate is so big and it's a thicker metal than my bezel, it requires a little bit more heating. So right now my bezel wire is heated thoroughly, but the backplate isn't heated as much. So I'm picking it up and heating underneath and watching my solder, just waiting for it to flow. I'm still moving around my flame. Oh, there it goes. So we got some pieces to flow. I'm going to keep my torch on the piece, but I'm going to pick up a section so that I can better heat underneath. I don't need to come much up here because that bezel wire is so thin and I know that it's already hot. There we go. Keep my flame there, keep it hot. Okay, that looks great. So I'm heating on the inside to make sure that the solder flowed through to the inside. And now I'm seeing that I need to pickle, because see how my flux is starting to turn pink? So it's ready to be pickled, but I'm pretty sure I got a good flow all the way to the inside. But we're going to be able to see a little bit better after it comes out of our pickle. So we got a perfect solder seam. The solder flowed all the way throughout the piece. And now we're just going to clean up any excess solder and file the outside of our border here to make it all uniform. Okay, So we've refined our piece, got rid of any excess solder, and made a really beautiful border around the piece. I've also filed away a rounded area on top so that our jump ring fits flush against the backplate. Now I'm going to be using medium solder, but it's important to note that I have 3 solder seams in this vicinity. It's a little risky, but you'll see that I can manipulate my flame in a way that won't affect the other solder points. So apply my flux. Now I'm focusing my heat on the backplate instead of the jump ring because it's much bigger. And if I just heated the jump ring, then the solder would just flow on the jump ring and it would not flow in between these 2 points. We've come out of the pickle and our piece is looking good. We're ready to file away and sand any excess solder. I really like the texture that's coming onto the metal with the file, so I'm going to actually put that everywhere, give it a nice texture. I finished the pendant and I'm happy with the way it looks. And now we're going to attach it to a snake chain with 2 jump rings that we'll make. I'm using a piece of 18 gauge sterling silver wire and a pair of half-round pliers. Okay, let's attach them. That's the last step of our soldering. Let's get it cleaned up. Great, our piece is done. Okay, let's go over what we made today. Our setting is ready for our stone. and we incorporated the backplate to be part of the design. We added 3 jump rings to the top to make it a functioning pendant. Overall, we made great progress towards finishing our piece. I hope you enjoyed the demo we did today. We covered a lot of metalsmithing techniques in the process of making this simple pendant. Join us for the next part of this project, where we will be setting the stone and giving it a quick polish. As always, feel free to check out our other videos and social media. Thanks for watching!